Starbucks noise, everybody.
That's perfect. 7 a.m. out there, 14-game slate. That's an appropriate intro noise.
It's 8 a.m. now. It's
8 a.m. Excuse me.
Yeah, clearly I'm bright and peppy and ready to go.
Yeah, that's plenty of time to get some caffeine in you, man. Come on.
I'm not a coffee guy. Just straight water for me. Just hoping that cold water gets me.
That's bonkers.
I don't want to get addicted. I have enough addictions in my life. I don't need to be, I can't get going without my coffee. Are you kidding me? What is up, guys? You got yourselves another day in the MLB, an early MLB strategy show for you guys today on the West Coast. We're going to take you through everything you need to know for today's 14-game slate. I guess besides the Dodgers pitcher, because even they don't know that yet, but everything else we will have for you today. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who you may see coming up later today as well on the MLB Deeper Dive, a man responsible for all of our customer success at Awesemo.com. He's Terry McBride. How are you doing, Terry?
Doing pretty good, bud. It should be a fun slate to get through. A lot of games piled up here, some interesting matchups. Early in the morning for you, middle of the morning for me. I've been up a little bit and working on my model here, updating some stuff, doing some fun things in the background. But yeah, happy to dig into this slate with you.
It is going to be a fun one to go through here. We are going to probably speed round harder than ever before because I am a man who is committed to not going much more than an hour on this show. But make sure you guys hit that like button here and, of course, subscribe to the channel to see all the content we'll have coming up all day long. And there's going to be a lot today. The MLB, the NBA, got MMA going on. Of course, there's so many sports going on at this point in time. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel and checking on all the stuff that we have going on. We also have a special thing going on today, which is more going to be for our NBA fans out there. But wanted to make sure to put it on your guys' radar that Yahoo's working with us on today's big slate they have going, where they have the 25K NBA baller. They also have a special promo code for Awesemo people out there where you can go and use the promo code Awesemo and get yourself $30 in free contest entries when you sign up using that promo code Awesemo. So make sure to go tune into the Live Before Lock show, the Deeper Dive, as well as the tip-off, which I'll be on later today because we're going to talk more about it. But if you are interested in playing some NBA today, doing it on Yahoo is going to be a wise move. They have some really nice prizes, and they're trying to get some people back onto the site today. So go check out their 25K NBA baller at Yahoo and use that promo code Awesemo to get yourself $30 in free entries on there as well. And then also make sure, as always, we talk about on here all the great tools we're going to reference throughout the course of the show, the top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, the player projections, ownership projections, all that's available to you at Awesemo.com/join. Get yourself an Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95 because that includes full access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, including player projections, ownership projections, the premium Slack channel, lineup builder, and much more. If you're only looking to play MLB DFS, sign up now for the Awesemo Plus weekly package. It's $15.95. So stop guessing, start winning, and join Awesemo Plus today. And Terry, do you have any overview thoughts here, or do you want to just get right into it? Because I feel like it's hard to have an overview on a 14-gamer, but if you have one, feel free to throw it out now.
A lot of good pitching on this slate. Kind of a wealth of great pitching options to choose from. Some in tough matchups, some in pretty cake matchups. So I think we'll get into each one as we go game by game, but that would probably be my top-down view, is we've got a lot of good pitching to choose from.
Yeah, so going to be definitely some big arms to talk about throughout the show. And if you guys have any questions in chat, drop them in. Obviously, we're going to be trying to make time as best we can, but always happy to hear from you guys as well, and appreciate the regulars in chat already. Our guy Butho, our guy Steven Leibovitz, and of course, El Negro Loco, our news god here, always on the watch, always vigilantly serving all of you people out there with all the news and greatest items that you need to know for MLB, NBA, and all the other sports going on. Let's get into our first game, though. We got Miami, 4.3 implied runs. Looks like they are going against John Lester, who is not on some of the projection models. I think not on Awesemo's yet either. He's in the ownership, but not in the player projections unless I'm missing something. But Lester, a guy who has certainly lost some luster over the last couple of years, down to a 16% K rate for him since 2020. The numbers for him giving up a little more power as well, a 5.1 xFIP overall. And I'll just say right away that to me, Terry, I know it's going against Miami. I know people do enjoy targeting Miami, even though they have made some improvements over the course of really the last couple seasons. But John Lester, I would not want a single share today. I think it's much more likely that he gets hit hard, even in a fairly cold day in Washington.
Yeah, it's not really a spot for me. Lester making his first start of the year, just not really somebody who's in consideration for me with this many options on the table. just looking at some of last year's numbers, the hard hit, he was 38th percentile in hard hit rate, 7th percentile, bottom of the league in barrels allowed, 9th percentile in strikeout rate, 7th percentile fastball velo. This is a guy with an 88, 89 mile an hour fastball. He's a soft tosser. He always has been, but he used to make it work a little bit better. I just think we're at the pretty much the end here with John Lester. So he's a lefty, so he'll hang around for another 10 years probably. But just not much there. 15.8% strikeout rate last year, 61 innings. I even against a Marlins team that is not great, but is at least capable now with some veterans in that lineup. I just don't like the spot for Lester. Doesn't mean I'm going to fire away with Marlins stacks. They're 26.8% strikeout rate against lefties so far this season. They are hitting them decently for power and for run production, though. Exactly 200 ISO for the team and 117 WRC plus, so creating runs 17% better than the average team. So maybe there's a little sneaky upside there, but it's not going to be a spot for me that I'm going to go too much on this biggest slate.
It does seem, even though Miami, not the highest probability to be a top stack, they are still going to be a little bit overowned than their chances of being the top stack. And as Terry mentioned, some power here in the Miami lineup that I wouldn't be opposed to. Adam Duvall's a guy that, if you're watching the Four Corners videos before we shifted things around and put me more on the deeper dive shows, I was talking about Duvall a lot because his power numbers always jump off the page, especially against lefties. A 362 ISO, only 113 at bats that he's had against a lefty, but over the last couple seasons, but still has had big power. Somebody that I don't mind is a one-off at 3,900 on DraftKings, but for the most part, if you're getting these guys in stacks, don't get a bunch. If you're getting some, though, it seems fine because Lester does give up good amount of production, 12% barreled ball rate over the last season. Plus, on Washington side, they're going against Pablo Lopez, a pitcher who has made some meaningful strides, and Lopez at a relatively cheap price point, a little better chance of being the top pitcher than his ownership's projected on DraftKings. I think, to me, Terry, Pablo Lopez would be strongly in the mix for an SP2. It's not a great strikeout matchup against Washington. They do have a 25% aggregate K rate in their lineup. 5 guys who strike out above league average. There'll be some better matchups on the slate today. But Pablo Lopez, only 4% owned. I think with him, he's up to a 26% K rate over the last season from 22.7 going back to 2019. Swing strike rates up, chase rates up, home run rates down. Lopez is one of those guys that I think, it's a big slate, so you're not going to see every single pitcher and get too deep on him. But Lopez has made some meaningful strides here that I think he's a very viable SP2, and I'm kind of surprised he's as low owned as he's going to be on DraftKings.
Yeah, that's a nice spot for DK. I really like that. He's good price for him, 7,800. Pitcher with a lot of upside, 8,100 on Fanduel. I don't think we need him on the Fanduel slate. There's just more options. We can go to him at that price. He's a good, good mid-range option there. He projects out kind of in the middle of the pack for me. Like you said, this isn't a great strikeout matchup. The Nats current year sitting in about the middle of the pack, 24.3% strikeout rate, 16th in the league against righties, but they aren't hitting much for power. Only a 121 team ISO so far. WRC plus 29% below average creating runs, only have hit 12 home runs against righties. All those are right-handed splits. So it's a interesting matchup in that they might not be really threatening him. So even if they don't strike out, even if he doesn't strike out 10, 11 of these guys, he might get through a good portion of this game, get the quality start, get the win. So I like the spot for Lopez, particularly if we think that the Marlins bats are going to get to Lester on the other side. Just boosts the win odds for him. But yeah, the strikeouts are up. He's pitching very, very well. There's a lot of good reasons to go here.
Washington stack, Terry, does look a little bit under-owned, but I am more a believer in Pablo Lopez than I am the Washington side of things. It is a cold day as well, which, going against John Lester, I don't mind, just he's giving up such, as Terry talked about, high exit velocity, lots of barrels, lots of power numbers that he's giving up. But going against Pablo Lopez, I don't see the reason to go to a Washington team that no Juan Soto here. Really, I think, you're basically then, if you're stacking these guys, you're trying to get either Trey Turner or hoping that Josh Bell starts to turn things back around more. I don't see a lot of utility in the Washington stack, but they are under owned, Terry. So how are you feeling about their hitters?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised. I'm just looking at the top stacks board. I'm a little surprised that they're ranked as highly as they are. They aren't projecting exactly that way for me. I do have a hole in the projections with Yadiel Hernandez. He's not popping up. I got to figure out why. I don't like this lineup nearly as much without Soto in it. I think, Trey Turner's spectacular. Obviously, I like Josh Bell as a hitter. I think we're going to see upside from him. Kyle Schwarber's okay as a power hitter, particularly against a righty, but Lopez is pretty good and should probably be able to sit Schwarber down a few times. If he gets into one, he gets into one. Then you get Starlin Castro, who I do like, but backside of his career, Yan Gomes, Victor Robles at the bottom, dynamic kid, but not producing much so far. excellent with his legs. There's just not a ton in this lineup for me. So yeah, it's projecting out a little bit differently. I'm not sure if I'm going to be getting to it quite as much as that indicates, but if there's leverage on it, it makes sense. I mean, if they stay highly ranked with a little leverage, I'll start to reconsider it and look more at the boss's numbers.
All right, let's go to our next game here. We got Garrett Cole facing Detroit, 2.5 implied runs for Detroit. Garrett Cole, since last season, a 35% K rate, going back to 2019, a 38.4% K rate. It's really, honestly, you can nickel and dime some of that stuff. Cole maybe being a little bit less effective. Velocity's actually been up, but the swing strike rate's been down a little bit. Chase rate down a little bit for him over the last season. So maybe some signs of a little bit of regression from where he was in his Houston days. The Yankees maybe not quite as adept at developing their pitching talent, though Terry can maybe gripe about that more. But anything going against Detroit, 6 guys that strike out above league average in their lineup today, 26% aggregate K rate for him. This spot for Cole, like Shane Bieber, I think, we'll talk about it more. I think I would favor Bieber a little bit more, and Cole's going to be owned by about 50% of the field on Draftkings, so he'll be well represented. Comparable numbers on Fanduel as well. But Garrett Cole, I think, certainly in the mix and should be right there with Shane Bieber if he doesn't end up just a little bit behind.
Yeah, I think Cole is right there at the top of the board. He is actually my highest projected pitcher given the matchup. Just spectacular spot going up against the Tigers. Team is currently third worst in the league, striking out 27.7% of the time against righties, creating runs 16% worse than the average. They've hit for a little pop in a year where pop is kind of down in general. 168 team ISO, 24 home runs in the split, but just nothing to really worry about. If they hit Cole, they might hit him for a home run, a solo shot, a 2-run homer, but they're not going to do a lot of damage to this guy. He's just dynamite. You mentioned the percentages he's been getting. 97th percentile so far this year in strikeout rate, 99th percentile in fastball velo, 95th in fastball spin, 91st in curveball spin. Just a dynamite pitcher. There's nothing to worry about here. If he's lost a tiny bit off of where he was in Houston, I'm still okay with that as a Yankee fan. And to answer your questions, no, we generally develop like one pitcher every 20 years or so. The last one I think was Andy Pettitte. So Yankees, typically we buy our pitchers. We don't develop them. So yeah, that could be why not as advanced and scientific a pitching organization as the Astros or like the Rays or the Braves or anybody like that. But I think he's still who he was, and he still remembers what he learned in Houston and getting it done.
Detroit stack, I think not even worth talking about very much for the sake of time, but 0.8% chance of being a top stack, 0.2% ownership. A team that you're probably not getting much of anything of. Maybe you get your one-offs of Akil Badu if you want to have that feel-good story in your life here, but not much for Detroit. On the other side, for Detroit's pitching, we're going to have Tariq Skubal going against the Yankees. It's a cold day or a cold-ish day in Yankee Stadium, so maybe a little bit of a downgrade, under 60 degrees expected by the time this one starts off. But going against Skubal doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world. He's given up a 331 ISO to right-handed hitters so far, a 7.5 xFIP, and granted, it's only been 175 righties faced for him, 222 batters faced overall, but getting hit hard in a way that I definitely think that Yankee stacks, they do look overowned, but I think taking some one-offs here, especially LeMahieu, I think is going to look good. We have Judge, and I'm seeing Judge in a projected lineup, but I don't know if he's going to be going today. But either way, there are some Yankees here to go to, Terry, where I think taking the hitters here, going to get Skubal, especially if that ownership drops throughout the day. The Yankees in a spot that I do like, even though it'd be nice if the weather were a little bit warmer to get that ball to fly a bit more.
But you just ruined my post-show plans, man. I was looking outside. It looks all nice and sunny. I was thinking I'll take the dog for a walk or something. Now I find out it's cold. I got to put socks on. This is ridiculous. Yeah, I think it's a great spot for the Yankees offense. Going up against the lefty with all these righty bats, coming home to Yankee Stadium where it's the short porches in right, but right-handers can target that porch going the other way just as easily. So I think the Yanks have some significant home run upside here. They're smashing through the top of my home run model. Judge is expected back. Booney was saying that he's back. He pinch hit last night in the game late, so they were just giving him a few days off to rest his aching body, but he's expected back tonight. I agree with you. If the ownership comes down, I'm very interested. We've seen this all week long. The Yanks are just underpriced across the board, particularly on the FanDuel side of things, where they're just way too cheap. So they're drawing a ton of ownership, but we can play the ownership, especially the way it is tonight. It's not as significant as it was the last few days. Bigger slate. I think we can get into it a little bit, but still with some of these hitters like Glaber's carrying around 30% ownership projection. Gleyber Torres should not be priced at 2,400 FanDuel. So that's why, but it's still difficult to roster any 30% owned player on a 14-game slate. So that becomes a little bit of a challenge, but there are good hitters in here that you can kind of mix and match, string together in different ways. And it's easier to put them together in unique combinations on this biggest slate as well, which is the important part.
Yeah, speaking of, we got Budho in the YouTube chat saying Kyle Shigioka should do well. I mean, he has been raking against lefties. He's been raking in general whenever he actually gets playing time, but 375 ISO versus lefties. Only he's faced, had 41 at bats facing lefties, but still has had pretty big power. So certainly a catcher option that seems worthwhile. Not the craziest price point for him, 5% ownership. And that is something with this Yankee stack it's worth pointing out here because they are cumulatively pretty highly owned, but it's mostly because of Giancarlo Stanton being 17% owned, Gio Urshela being 20% owned. This, to talk about drafting specifically. So if you do omit an Urshela or a Stanton, you could get a lower ownership product overall for the stack. So maybe that's one way to keep it down a little bit if you wanted to go to a Higashioka or I guess some of these other guys that do have pretty big upside, but just getting less ownership for whatever reasons. Any other thoughts on the hitters here for the Yankees, Terry? I feel like we talked about most of these guys, but just want to make sure we cover them because I do think it's a team that does have pretty big upside because of the situation and the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the bottom of the order with this team. They turn over the order pretty well when they're hitting. So you can get to Clint Frazier down there. You mentioned Higgy. I think Higgy makes a nice little catcher play if he's in the lineup on the DK slate, particularly because you got to get to a catcher over there. Rougned Odor, I've given my opinions on all week long. He's one of the worst hitters in the league for the last few years, continues to prove it every night.
But he gets hits at big times, Terry. That's what I've been seeing on Twitter recently is that whenever they need a hit, he's got the most hits with runners in scoring position or something. And I hate it so much.
2 nights ago with the bases loaded in the 8th inning down 2 runs when he struck out. Yeah, that was great. I love that one. So, yeah, that's the Rougned Odor I know and love or don't love and wish wasn't on my team. But that notwithstanding, if he's not going to be owned, you can mix him in, right? The reason I was so off of him earlier in the week was because he was going off at like 30% ownership. That's a very different play than going off at like 2.8% ownership that we've got here for today. So you can get to him at the bottom of the lineup if you want to. But I'm really interested in LeMahieu going off at under 10% ownership, Judgy going off under 10%. So like you said, if you're skipping over one of the very highly owned hitters, make it Urshela, not Stanton, and include Stanton in your lineups. Urshela, much worse hitter, and Stanton kind of raking right now and is one of the best power hitters in the league. They said it on the broadcast last night, 5 of the 6 hardest hit balls in the league so far this year from Giancarlo Stanton. So he just crushes everything he sees when he gets the bat on the ball. So don't skip him in your stacks, but it's a good spot for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, Gio, certainly a fine player in his own right, but 20% owned Gio, maybe not the place you want to be on a slate of this size. Next game we got here, the Mets, 4.3 implied runs against Chase Anderson. Another 59-degree day here expected in Philadelphia. We got Marcus Stroman on the other side going against Philadelphia, 3.7 implied runs. And the Mets stack, I think, seems a little bit under-owned. I'm okay with that going against Chase Anderson, a guy who's given up a 292 batting average since last season, 1.6 whip. A lot of bad numbers, though. Not the home run rate for him has actually been up pretty high, a 6% home run rate for him. Going back to 2019, a 4.5% home run rate. So the Mets stack, I think Terry looks better than Chase Anderson's side. I don't see a lot of reason to go to Chase Anderson, but if you get some Mets stacks, not something I'm opposed to, not a priority for me by any stretch, but I think they seem a little bit under-owned, and that's enough for me to get there today.
Yeah, for me, this looks like a good spot for the Mets bats. They're actually going a little over on the Fanduel side of things, which sucks. I was hoping to get to them with a little bit of leverage on them, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But I really like the way that they look in this matchup. Chase Anderson not projecting well at all for me. Only a 17.1% strikeout rate over his 16 innings this year. He was at 24.7 in 33 innings last year, 21% in 139 the year before. So at his upside, he's a league average strikeout pitcher. I don't think there's much to really threaten these Mets bats. There's some very good bats in this lineup in terms of preventing strikeouts. There's some heavy strikeout bats as well, but they mix in a few guys who are very good at limiting it. So I think the upside's capped for Anderson, and I think there's significant power upside for the Mets bats, and they are just dramatically underpriced on FanDuel. The only hitter on FanDuel, there's 3 hitters over 3,000. Francisco Lindor is at 3,000, which is ridiculous. JD Davis is at 3,100, and then Pete Alonso's 38, which is somewhat appropriate. Everybody else is under 3,000. That's ridiculous. Michael Conforto hitting cleanup against a righty at 2,800 is a smash spot. Nimmo, 2,900. I mentioned Lindor, 3,000. Jeff McNeil, 26 down the bottom of the lineup. You get a good catcher in this lineup with James McCann for 2,200 if you want him. 4,000 on the DK slate. There's a lot of spots to go with this Mets lineup. They could be, and particularly on DK, they could be sneaky.
On the Phillies side, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot to like going against Marcus Stroman, a pitcher who over the last season has been, it's weird. He's not getting strikeouts at all, but his fly ball rates come down even lower, an 18% fly ball rate over the last season and change, not giving up a lot of hard contact, 0.99 whip, barreled ball rate, 4.1%. His velocity's actually been up over the last season, which is interesting to note. But I don't like Stroman very much. He's not getting strikeouts, only a 16% rate, a 20% rate going back to 2019. And the Philly side, I just don't know they're going to get much production going against Stroman, given the fact that he does really just one of the better preventative pitchers I think you're going to find on this slate or really in general in the league. So Stroman to me, not in play. Philly, not in play. Do you have any more thoughts or do you disagree on either part of that?
Yeah, I wouldn't go to Stroman just because he doesn't strike anybody out. I think he's a talented pitcher for what he does, which is exactly what you said. Keep the ball on the ground, keep the ball in the park. A lot of worm burners. The increased velocity helps with that too, because his breaking stuff and his sinking stuff works off of that and just makes guys swing over the top of the ball. So it really, really helps and makes him even more dynamic. Current year, 59.7% ground ball rate. That's up from 53.7 in 2019, 62.1 in 2018 and 2017. So he is an extreme ground ball pitcher. Takes the bats out of the Phillies' hands a little bit. I'm still getting okay power marks for the guys who you would expect to have good power in this lineup. But for the pricing, for the positioning, it's probably not going to be a go-to stack for me. It might come up a few times just in contrarian sorting, in terms of there's not going to be many people at all on the FanDuel slate on these guys. DK, same thing. Pretty much under 2% owned across the board for these guys, except Bryce Harper, and except only on the FanDuel slate for Bryce Harper. So it's an interesting contrarian spot in that nobody's going to be there. They're talented bats. I just think that Stroman takes so much of the upside away from him that it's a real danger spot if you do go to it. So maybe in a couple sneaky shares, but not in anything where I'm going to be going over the top rostering them at all.
All right, next game up, we got the Cubs 4.2 implied runs going against Wade Miley. Wade Miley's been actually even better in terms of run prevention this year. Still not getting a lot of strikeouts. That has always been the knock on him. An 18% K rate over the last season, going back to 2019, a 19.2% K rate. It's not going to do a whole lot for you on a slate of this size. On the other side, the Cubs going to be a little bit under-owned according to the top stacks tool, and it does seem the power numbers for them. I guess if they can get lift on some of these Wade Miley balls, which is going to be tough, only a 22% fly ball rate for him, kind of like we were talking about Marcus Stroman. Not a lot of home runs either, a 2% home run rate for him over the last season, which is under league average by a pretty good margin. That said, I don't mind getting some Cubs into lineups here. I think Wade Miley's side of things, not a great projection on him. The price point on DraftKings not appealing to me. I think it would be the same case on FanDuel. Cubs hitters, though, kind of a not great run total here for them, given the fact they are playing at Cincinnati. But I think the Cubs stack, to me, 4.2 implied runs, 6% chance, a little bit under that probability of being the top stack. I think they look fine, Terry, and not in a way that's jumping out meaningfully because it is Wade Miley. But I think overall, if I get some Cubs, same thing as the Mets here, I'm not opposed at all to getting at least with the field, maybe a little bit above the field on the Cubs.
Yeah, I'll probably mix in some Cubs. The concern for me is similar, like you were just saying. With Miley, we get similar guy who can sap power a little bit. So the marks are down a little across the board for home runs for the Cubs. A little bit more dramatically, actually, than they were for the Phillies on the other side of things. And we see Miley's just been very good at limiting hard contact, only 18.5% hard contact rate this year. Most of it goes into medium so far this year. 63.1% medium contact is bananas. But last year, you see 31.8% hard contact, soft contact induced, 31.8% hard contact allowed. Those are very good numbers. So he's good at limiting that, taking the bats out of the opponent's hands a little bit and keeping the ball in the yard. He's not a strikeout guy, like you said. I don't think I'll have any shares of Wade Miley here. But it's just interesting. It might limit the Cubs enough that I'm not going to get to them in extreme degrees. But again, it's another team that is under-owned, pretty underpriced, except for the big bats in the middle in Chris Bryant and Javi Baez on the FanDuel slate. And then you get Wilson Contreras priced up on DK where you need to roster a catcher. But I think Anthony Rizzo for 31 on FanDuel, 41 on DK, if he's leading off again, is a spectacular spot. So there's a lot to like. Even though that's lefty-lefty, I can get there with Rizzo leading off. And just some of these other spots, throughout the lineup are interesting. So I can get to some Cub stacks. You can put them together in good ways. I wish they had the multi-position on FanDuel that they do on DK with Matt Duffy and Chris Bryant. I think that makes the two of them even more interesting. But yeah, they're probably a more interesting stack on DK because of that.
On the other side, we have Cincinnati going against Jake Arrieta. Jake Arrieta, another guy that I would consider not in my player pool today very much. 19% K rate for him over the last season. Going back to 2019, even a little bit lower, an 18.6% K rate for him. And giving up some decent power to lefties in particular, along with a 301 batting average, 202 ISO allowed to left-handed hitters. And he's going to get some tough ones up top. Jesse Winker, I think Joey Votto look like solid plays. So they are priced for this spot against Jake Arrieta on DraftKings for sure. Both guys over 5K. Nick Castellanos over 6K in this situation on DraftKings, which is outlandish. That said, this is a pay up to be contrarian spot. Only 1.8% ownership expected today for the stack. 5% chance of being the top stack. It's a good park, Terry. I feel like all these things have put me on getting some Reds today, even though it does seem uncomfortable to pay the prices for some of these guys.
Yeah, so I know the salaries work differently across sites, but it's just amusing that the top 4 hitters in that lineup on DK are only 2,000 less expensive than the entire lineup is on FanDuel as a sum, which is just wacky. Definitely love the spot on FanDuel. They're getting some ownership, but they're cheap. 2,700 for Joey Votto, mispriced. 2,900 Eugenio Suarez, mispriced. 3,000 Mike Moustakas, mispriced. You get my point here. Jesse Winker is expensive, but not highly owned. Nick Castellanos, same thing. Love getting to those guys. Winker hits everything hard and just has just been obliterating the ball so far this year. Going up against Jake Arrieta, who is 27th bottom of the league percentile, average exit velo allowed, 18th percentile max exit velo allowed, 42nd percentile hard hit rate allowed, only 37th percentile strikeout rate, and 13th percentile chase rate. Just not pitching well, not who he used to be. I think we can throw bats at Jake Arrieta all day long. I can get over the field on the Reds here.
Let's get to our next game here. We got Houston getting 3.8 implied runs. And hit that like button, guys. We're trying to make as good of a time we can while still making sure to cover all the stuff that we know at this point in the slate. So we appreciate the love on here, especially for the MLB shows when you're watching one on the Awesemo channel. Make sure to hit that like button because it's tough times in MLB right now, competing with the NBA and all that's going on. The Kentucky Derby, lots of things. The NFL draft still going on. So hit that like button here. We appreciate the support a bunch to help keep the show popping up for new people out there. But Houston, 3.8 implied runs going against Ryan Yarbrough, who has been pitching a little bit deeper into games than people who maybe haven't been paying the closest attention to Ryan Yarbrough, primarily in the past, used him as more of an opener. Now he's getting a little bit more of extended run. But as a result, his efficiency has dropped quite a bit here, down to an 18.6% K rate. Still not giving up a lot of power, getting a good amount of soft contact. So these are good things for Yarbrough, but I don't see myself wanting to get there very much for him as a pitcher. And Houston playing in a park that's got to have the roof closed and doesn't offer a lot in terms of power. I get going to Houston here, but they are priced a little bit cheaper, I guess, than you might expect normally for Houston. But 3.8 implied runs going against Yarbrough and a competent bullpen. I don't like really either side very much, Terry. And I think the top stack tool, I guess, gives them a little bit of leverage in terms of being a higher probability for being a top stack, but still it's not a great number relative to this big slate. I don't think this is the spot that I'd want to pay for Houston very much on DraftKings, but do you feel differently about them or Ryan Yarbrough on FanDuel?
I don't want to get to Ryan Yarbrough on either site, really. 8,300 is a little expensive for him in this spot as an SP2. I think he is interesting in certain spots this year now that he's a little bit more stretched out, like you were saying. 6,200 on FanDuel. I just don't think there's a need to go to that price in this matchup. Astros are just spectacular against left-handed pitching and have been for the last few seasons. They're not hitting for a ton of power in the split so far this year. They've only 137 team ISO against lefties, but they only strike out 18.2% of the time, which is third best in the league. Over the last couple seasons, they've been first best in the league in the strikeout rate against lefties. They've got 116 WRC plus as a team against lefties, so 16% better than average. Only hit 9 home runs. Again, the power has not really been there, but they're just spectacular in the split. So I don't mind going to some Astros. They're not going to be getting a ton of ownership on either site. Like you said, they're a little bit actually priced down on the DK slate, under 5K for most of the hitters at the top of the lineup. They're priced up the other way on the FanDuel slate, bizarrely. A lot of guys in the mid to high 3,000s on the FanDuel slate, which is keeping the ownership super low. So I can get there a little bit. I don't mind getting to Jordan Alvarez, lefty-lefty. He is a spectacular hitter against both hands. You can get to the righties in this lineup pretty easily with Carlos Correa, Yulesky Gurriel, Jose Altuve. Michael Brantley, lefty-lefty, is not that big a problem. Less power, but that's okay. Kyle Tucker loses a little bit more lefty-lefty, but you can work him in if he's in the lineup. I just think there's ways to build with this team. So I'll probably have more Astros in the field, but I'm not going to go totally nuts with it given the pricing.
Yep, I think that sounds about right to me, and I certainly don't mind people taking some Astros really anytime. But it does seem like it's not the best park factors than Ryan Yarbrough. I think a guy that I'm not necessarily trying to target against. So if you get some, that's fine, and it does have again, it's higher probability of being a top stack than ownership. Only 1% ownership expected for Houston today, compared to a 3.5% chance of being the top stack. On the other side, the pitching does look more appealing to me. Going to Lance McCullers, going against a Tampa Bay lineup with a 3.7 point implied run total, 25.7% K rate in their projected lineup today. 6 guys that strike out above league average. McCullers, to me, a decent mid-tier pitcher here on DraftKings. I think he and Pablo Lopez, the two that stand out to me in their relative price points. Lopez a little bit cheaper. McCullers, pretty solid 25% K rate overall in the last season plus. Not a lot of power given up here, under a 2% home run rate. And then facing that Tampa Bay lineup, that park factors are going to help them out. They have guys that strike out. McCullers, to me, I think strongly in play, though I'm probably not a play that I'm viewing as a high priority one, but one that I think I would get more than the Tampa Bay stack.
Yeah, I like the spot here from McCullers. My 4th highest projected FanDuel starter and only cost $7,400 on the FanDuel slate. I can get to that all day long. I don't have the ownership on him in front of me, so that would be the one concern, is where he gets owned at that price. But based on just, in a vacuum without looking at ownership, I really like that spot for McCullers. I can get to that a lot. You mentioned all the reasons that I like it. He's been pitching well. 6th percentile in max exit velo and 25th percentile in hard hit rate. Those would be the 2 concerns. Couple home run hitters, couple guys who do hit the ball pretty hard in that Tampa lineup. So that would be the only issue here, but I'm not really worried about it. He's got excellent stuff. He's been striking guys out. He's been kind of returned to form. So yeah, get me to McCullers as much as I can, pending the look at the ownership. But just really projecting well for me. 25% strikeout rate this year so far, 24.7% last year. Walking a few more hitters so far this year. The xFIP is up, but I think these are things that come out in the wash as we get through a bigger sample. I think the talent and the stuff is there right now.
All right, halfway point of the show. We still got 9 games left. So here's one important thing for you guys to know out there. Whenever you're not able to watch your favorite Awesemo shows on YouTube, perhaps when they are cramming in an impossible amount of games into 1 hour, make sure to go check out the Awesemo Podcast Network, because we got a podcast for every sport. We're available on all the major platforms out there. So head on over to awesemo.com/podcast. Check out the latest. All you have to do is also leave a 5-star review on one of our podcasts with your Twitter handle or your email address, and you'll be eligible to win a free week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Those winners are awarded every Friday, and those reviews will carry over for about a year. So there you go. You can get another free week on there. I know people are always looking for ways to get those free memberships out there. So that is one. Go check out all the podcasts at awesemo.com/podcast. Let's get to our next game here. We got a very high run total game. Atlanta 5.1 implied runs against Robbie Ray. Toronto 5.5 implied runs against Drew Smiley. And Robbie Ray, a guy who does have that strikeout upside, though it has come down a little bit. He's a weird case where his velocity's been up, but his strikeout rate has dropped from a 30% one, a little bit under that since 2019, down to 26% over the last season and change. His whip has also been up. The control has been an issue. 1.8 whip for him, 5.6 xFIP. All this grades out as being a positive addition to Atlanta here, where they're playing in a good park. They have a lot of power hitters. You could play Robbie Ray, I think, as a contrarian pay down option on DraftKings, just maybe a little bit. But I do think the stack is going to be the way you'd want to go here, though they are looking mostly appropriately owned, Terry. So how are you handling this one? Are you getting any Ray? And then give me your thoughts on the Atlanta stack.
Yeah, Ray's a guy that over the years we've been able to mix into, decent spots. I don't know that this is that spot. I respect the Braves lineup too much. I don't think he's got it right now. Like you said, the strikeout rates come down. The walks they're okay compared to last year's small sample, 17.9%, but they're up a little bit from the bigger sample he had the year before. In 174 innings, he was walking 11.2% of hitters. Small sample so far this year, he's up to 13%. The strikeouts are down. The walks are up. It's a bad mix. That is kind of who Robbie Ray is, though. Sometimes he walks a bunch of hitters. He's always been a high whip kind of a guy and dances through that for fantasy purposes with the high strikeouts. So if the strikeouts aren't there, I just think we shave too much off of his upside and we're walking too much of a tightrope. So definitely give me the Brave side of this one. I don't mind the ownership that much on FanDuel. I think we can get to playable spots there. Ronald Acuna, obviously at 34%, is stratospherically owned, but everybody else is reasonable. Ozuna pulling around 20%, but the rest of the bats, Freddie Freeman around 12, Darno under 5, Albies under 10. So I think we can get to some of these guys. I like Swanson and Austin Riley as mix and match options there. So yeah, give me the Atlanta stack side of this one for sure. And just the ballpark, they're playing on a little league field at this point. So it's definitely a good spot for power on both sides of this one.
Yeah, just watch that ownership right now. The Braves look a little bit overowned, and it's possible throughout the day because of this being really the best matchup on paper that ownership does come up to maybe a point where it gets closer to untenable, but something to keep in mind here. And also worth pointing out on DraftKings, Ronald Acuna going to be the one driving a lot of that stack ownership, 25% for him. And I guess a shocking amount going to Pablo Sandoval too. He's a cheap play who does hit better than people realize, I guess maybe because of their priors against him, but still going to be 17% owned, it looks like, on DK. For Toronto's side, going to see a very chalky George Springer and a very chalky Danny Jansen, two guys over 30% in this lineup, according to our ownership projections, which you can always get for yourself at awesemo.com/join. Going against Drew Smyly, and Drew Smyly is a pitcher who does seem to have turned things around in a notable way. Over the last season, he's down to a 1.14 whip, up to just shy of a 33% K rate. Going back to 2019, he had a 26% K rate and a 1.5 whip. Not a guy I have a high confidence level in, but definitely could find some strikeouts here. It does seem like he's only pitching about 4 innings deep into games. It's still getting barreled pretty hard, Terry. So I have to assume you don't love Drew Smyly very much, but his strikeout numbers do jump out as having taken a swift turn upwards in a way that I wouldn't have expected.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Braves brought him in. They were specifically targeting him, and I forget who their other free agent. Charlie Morton. Those were like 1 and 1A on their free agent list, apparently, based on what Smyly did last year. I mentioned the Braves just before as one of those advanced pitching organizations. So this was a guy they wanted. This is a guy that they thought had made specific improvements. And I'm just looking at his pitch mix here. It does look like last year he had picked up some pretty significant spin on his curveball. He took it up by about 200 RPMs, which makes a big difference. Same thing with his four-seamer, took it up by about 200 RPMs. He's lost a little of that this year so far. It's come back down to about where it was the year before last, which is kind of interesting. That is not what Atlanta wants to see here. So I'm curious to see if that comes back for him over the season. That's what was creating that higher strikeout rate. He's right around where he was 2 years ago now, in the 23s. So it's a little bit of a concern from that. I don't know that it's going to be a big turnaround tonight. I don't know that it's going to be a big turnaround against this pretty good Blue Jays lineup that I don't really want to tangle with a lefty here. So I think I'm much more on the bat side of things. Again, playing in a minor league field on a little league ball field. I just think it's more of a spot for the bats. I do get a decent projection on Smyly. I just don't really trust it right now.
Yeah, no, that's reasonable. I think just looking at him was more, I think, a leverage play where the stack does look overowned by a decent margin here. 12% ownership expected overall for the stack, though. Again, that's being driven on DraftKings by a lot of ownership expected for George Springer and a lot of ownership expected for Danny Jansen, but only a 7% chance of them being the top stack. So, they're over leveraged, but I guess if you avoid Springer and Jansen, that's less of an issue. And that's sort of where I guess we can go to here with the 5.5 implied run total for Toronto and some of the issues with Smyly that could pop up today. How are you handling Toronto? Because I do think even though Springer's a quality hitter hitting the leadoff spot, not a bad price tag, if I'm playing Toronto, I think it would be more 3-man stacks and just getting away from Springer and Danny Jansen rather than going to the full 5-man.
Yeah, I like the idea of using them in the smaller stacks and using them in 3-mans. And then, you can even get to some quality one-offs from this lineup, particularly like Vlad kind of pops out to me at 4,000 on Fanduel. That's not too hefty a price. You get him at first and third base and only projected for 10% ownership right now. That's a pretty damn good one-off in my book. You can get the guys like Grichuk and Lourdes Gurriel in there, Kevin Biggio, Marcus Semien even hitting down toward the bottom of the lineup, Bo Bichette not getting too much ownership up top. So yeah, really, if you're skipping George Springer and Danny Jansen here, which in Springer, you're skipping a spectacular hitter, in Danny Jansen, you're skipping a catcher on DK, but you can get to everybody else at fair ownership at worst and pretty low ownership on some of these guys. Like Kevin Biggio, 3.5% owned on Fanduel, under 1% owned on DK, third base and outfield eligible on DK. There's a lot of upside and a lot of utility in that bat right there for that price. So I definitely like getting to some of that against Drew Smyly here. Even lefty-lefty with a guy like Biggio, I don't really mind it. And the rest of these guys are right-handed. So definitely a very good spot for some of these Toronto bats. And I'm not that worried about the ownership. And, saying, just going back to what you said about Smyly and the potential to throw a pitcher at some contrarian bats, that's something for baseball. I typically like to look at it the other way. Like if a pitcher is really highly owned, I might throw a stack at him and take the bat side of things. I'm less often doing it with, all right, that stack is really highly owned, let me throw the pitcher at them. It's just harder, I think, for the pitcher to create that big start where he's getting so much edge on the field in that spot where it's already recognized as a tricky spot. So you're throwing a pitcher up against what are most likely excellent bats in a good spot and hoping that he has that outlier start where he's outscoring the field of pitchers on a very big slate by like 15, 20 points. I just don't see that for Drew Smiley here. So I think I'm more on the Jay side of things, but I get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, and it's usually, I think that's a more appealing approach when you have a high strikeout lineup like a Brewers, let's say, than this one with Toronto, where only a 21% aggregate K rate, 3 guys that strike out above league average. So yeah, I agree. Like, I think especially looking at Smiley's numbers and 1.2 with what Terry mentioned versus for the lefty hitters here, Smiley has been shockingly hit very hard by lefties in a way that I'm sure has to regress a little bit, but a 7.1 xFIP since 2019, a 9% home run rate allowed to lefties with a 355 ISO. So have no issue playing lefties against him, even though those numbers should stabilize a little bit, but he's definitely given up power to either side. He may get a few strikeouts here, but maybe the strikeouts go to George Springer and Danny Jansen and not some of the other guys. Let's keep going through here. We got Boston 4.4 implied runs against Kohei Irihara, and we also have on the other side Texas 3.6 implied runs against Nathan Eovaldi. Not the highest temperature day in Texas, so keep that in mind for the hitters here. They're not getting a gigantic bump, only a nice 69-degree temperature, but that's not that great for hitting. Kohei Irihara has been very bad. Going against him seems like a decent move. Overall, giving up a 2-20 ISO. Having faced 91 batters faced. Kohei Irihara's numbers are just baffling, so that just kind of threw me for a loop. But 14% K rate overall, 13% barreled ball rate. Looks bad. I would not play Irihara today. Going to Boston seems fine, though. They're not getting as big of a Texas bump as you'd like to see, but still a higher probability of being a top stack in their ownership. So Boston stack or Kohei Irihara for you, Terry? Does either side stand out?
Out of those two, it would definitely be the Boston stack, particularly where they're underpriced, like everybody is on the Fanduel slate. The entire bottom of the lineup is priced under 2,500 on Fanduel. The 3 hitters in the core of the lineup are in the mid threes. It's just very easy to get to this team. They've got pretty strong upside, solid marks in my power model here. I don't really know why Kohei Arihara is a major league pitcher right now. A few years in the NPB. Was not an effective strikeout pitcher over there. He was fine. He was an effective contact type pitcher, but that's not the kind of guy that they're typically bringing to the majors. So I really don't understand what this kid's even doing in the league. So I wouldn't touch him with at all on either site, even for 5,500 on DK, 68 on FanDuel, just totally off the board for me in terms of pitching options. So I can definitely get to Red Sox stacks. And then I like the looks, I hate to say it, of Nathan Eovaldi on the other side, given the spectacular strikeout matchup that he's in.
Yeah, and Nathan Eovaldi, crazy velocity for numbers for him that I think really jump off the page. 97.6 miles per hour on his fastball over the last season plus, and he's getting hit pretty hard still at 263 batting average allowed. But I agree, going against Texas, a team that certainly no strangers to striking out, 25% aggregate K rate in their lineup today. Eovaldi, I agree, would be in that tier of guys we talked about. I would put him in with the Pablo Lopez and Lance McCullers as a guy that I want to get some exposure to. Texas bats, I don't see anything for, but just give me your Eovaldi take here, because unless you feel differently about Texas, want to get there a little bit.
Since there's nobody on them, and it's not like Eovaldi's going off at like 10% ownership, even he's under 5% right now. I'm more on the Eovaldi side. I think that's a sneaky spot at that low ownership, but he is a pitcher that I don't fully trust, tends to put too many guys on base, and just is, there's enough upside in that Texas lineup in terms of power in the top 4, top 5, maybe, that if I'm rostering a lot of Eovaldi, I'll probably throw a couple stacks at him on the other side of things. It's not a spot that I necessarily like or would go to otherwise, but I think I'll have enough Eovaldi in my life that I'll want some shares of the other side just to balance it out and to hedge a little bit. But that's all it really is for me as a hedge stack. So Eovaldi, 22.7% strikeout rate over 28 innings this year, 26.1% over 48 last year. Good strikeout pitcher, has had control problems historically. 2 years ago, 11.6% walk rate with a 5.90 xFIP and a 1.58 WHIP. That's around who he's been through his career, between the 4s and the 5s in xFIP, between the 1.2s and the 1.4s in WHIP. So we can expect a few guys on base, but I think there's a significant strikeout upside here for him. 30.8% strikeout rate so far this season for the Rangers against righties, worst in the league. So, and they've been worst in the league over the last 3 years. So definitely think there's a good chance Eovaldi puts up a nice start for the money here.
right, so let's make up some time on this next game here. We got the Dodgers who are going against Freddie Peralta, and we do not know who's starting for the Dodgers yet, though I think Terry may have a guess for you guys, so we can talk about that in a second. But if there is a starter for the Dodgers who goes deep into games, it would not be a bad spot going against Milwaukee. 7 guys that strike out above league average in their lineup, 27% aggregate K rate in their projected lineup as well. And Peralta on the other side, Peralta's stuff has gotten a lot better over the last season and change, up to a 39% K rate, a 3.2 xFIP for him, both market improvements since 2019. Also a 187 batting average allowed, 1.2 whip. All these numbers are pretty significant jumps from the 2019 sample size for him, though the price tag on DK started to catch up. That said, it's hard to advocate for a guy like Peralta going against the Dodgers. Just not a tough situation, obviously, for any pitcher to get through, no matter how good your stuff is looking. And I think that's sort of where I'd leave it, where if I got some Peralta, I wouldn't be mad. The field's going to be having him about 5%. And Dodgers bats too, looking a little bit under-owned, but I think because Peralta's stuff has been that good, and the Milwaukee bullpen really not that bad behind him. I don't love the Dodgers stack today, so give me your thoughts about this whole game, Terry, and I guess you could just jump to the Dodgers pitching situation too when you wrap up on Peralta and the hitters.
Yeah, so Peralta's a guy I plan to win money with this year. I just don't think it's going to be tonight. I love the price at 8,000. I love the ownership at 2.8%, but it's a tough matchup against these Dodgers. He could come out and have a nice start. I don't know that he's going to come out and have a slate-breaking start, even if he hits an upside start. Dodgers are just very good. 23.7% strikeout rate against righties so far this year. That's 11th in the league, but it's right in a big group. They could easily be, second or third in the league. 180 team ISO against righties, 122 WRC plus against righties so far this year, leads the league, 22% better than average creating runs against right-handed pitching. So there's just a lot of good bats here. Tough spot for Freddie. I think he's a dynamite pitcher. You see the strikeout rates are up to 41.8% in 22 innings this year. He was at 37.6% in 29 innings last year, 85 innings the year before, 30.1%. So you can see nice growth trajectory there. He's made some specific changes to his pitch mix. It's just a tough spot, but definitely can get to some Freddie Peralta in other spots later in the year. If you wanted to throw a few darts with him, I wouldn't mind it. I just wouldn't make it a big part of my pitching portfolio tonight. But it could certainly be sneaky upside. I just don't trust to get enough strikeouts against this spectacular Dodgers lineup. I don't know that I would run a bunch of Dodgers stacks against him. It would be fairly contrarian. They're not getting a lot of ownership on either site. They're fairly expensive. They're still hard to put together. They're hard to put together with another good stack and a high quality pitcher. But if you can figure out a good way to do it, it would be a sneaky move with one of the best lineups in baseball. I have Dustin May going, but that was a total guess. I think that might be where they're going, but I'm not totally sure. It could be a bullpen game. They haven't announced the starter. If it's Dustin May, 8,600 on Fanduel, 88 on DK. Not projecting great for me, but it is an excellent strikeout matchup. It would just be about the innings and how deep into the game he's going to go. If we're getting 6 innings out of Dustin May here, I could get into it a little bit. Wouldn't be a big part of my portfolio either at that price, but I could get into some of the mixing in. And on DK, maybe he's a little bit more interesting as a 88 is not really an SP2 price, though. If he was cheaper on DK, he'd be more interesting, assuming that he's the pitcher.
In Milwaukee's bats, it seems looking a little bit overowned relative to their chances of being a top stack. They are a value team that's going to pop up today, but wait to see who the pitcher is going to be, I think, before you make that assessment. But sort of hard to make the argument for or against the Brewers too much, other than the fact they have guys that strike out a lot, given the fact that we're not sure about who the pitcher is going to be. Let's keep going through here. Kansas City, 3.7 implied runs against Michael Pineda. Pineda, perfectly average pitcher in a lot of ways that if you get some of today, doesn't seem like the worst thing, but also not going to be highly owned for a reason. Only 1% ownership expected on DK. I'm not dying to go his way very much. The Kansas City hitters, I guess you could maybe make a case for as well, but Pineda's stuff has just been solid enough. Only a 2% on run rate since last season, which is down from a 3.4% going back to 2019. So maybe he is due for a little more power going against him, but I just really don't love the situation. It's not like it's a hot day either in Minnesota, and the park, for the most part, does contain power for everybody who's not the Twins in that home stadium. I just don't see Pineda or Kansas City being the most appealing, Terry, but do you feel strongly about either side?
I get a decent little projection on Pineda. 8,300 is about fair for him. I wish he was at the 7,600 price on FanDuel that he is on DK. I think he's in the mix as an SP2, a low-owned SP2 on the DraftKings slate. I wouldn't mind throwing a few darts, but I respect this Royals lineup enough, particularly, 1 through 7 is pretty solid. So I can get to some Royal stacks here too. The 5 through 7 hitters are underpriced. The top 4 hitters are fairly priced on FanDuel, but they're not getting any ownership. And it's one of those dynamic lineups. We've talked about it a few times with power and speed, average a decent hit tools. So I can get to some Royal stacks, maybe a little bit more than the field is here, up against not the most reliable pitcher in the world. Decent strikeout spot for Pineda in terms of his ability, but the Royals are pretty decent at limiting the strikeouts. So I'm not really getting to much Pineda, I don't think. And I would probably lean into the Royals bats a little bit, but not one I'm going to go crazy with. Twins bats on the other side going up against Singer. I like a little bit better, getting a little bit more power out of them. The prices are down on them as well. Love the idea of getting to Alex Kirilloff for the dead minimum on FanDuel, 2,500 on DK. He's drawing some ownership on DK, but he's not really on the FanDuel slate, so I can definitely mix him into some of these twin stacks. Singer's a pretty good pitcher, 28.4% strikeout rate so far this year, 303 xFIP, 108 whip. But young guy, he's still figuring things out. I don't think I need to go to him. I'm getting an okay projection, but I don't love the FanDuel price. If you wanted to throw a few shares of him as a $7,000 SP2 on DK, that's fine. I don't really mind it, but I respect the hell out of this Twins lineup and all their power.
Singer pitching about 5 innings deep into games, so pretty decent numbers for him. And he might pop up in an optimizer, I think, relative to his salary. So yeah, not one that I would be crazy opposed to. But I would point out though on DraftKings, Alex Kirilloff, 17% ownership because of the price tag. I think Kevin Kiermaier also had a crazy amount of ownership. Those are the two value plays that are going to come up more in an optimizer that might be worth, I don't know, I want to say taking out of a player pool, but trying to mute them as much as you can, because those are guys that are just going to pop up because they are value plays. And I think for not a lot of other reason on DraftKings. But besides that, I think your takes about Minnesota are fine. Never really, to me, a bad day to play Minnesota. Even though Springer has limited power pretty well, they certainly have the ability to get going against anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point on the Kirilloff thing. It's going to be the same on FanDuel, particularly if you're crunching 4 threes. You're going to get a lot of Alex Kirilloff at 2,000 in that one-off spot. So just be wary of that. And if you can find a good guy to swap in there as a pivot for your discount guy, that might be a good idea, because he's going to draw a lot of ownership on DK in particular.
All right, next game up, we got Cleveland, 3.5 implied runs against Dallas Keuchel. Dallas Keuchel, we know the thing with him is that for the most part, he's not going to get many strikeouts. He'll randomly spike a 10 strikeout day, and you'll go, how did Dallas Keuchel suddenly get good at strikeouts? And the answer is no, he is not. Down to a 15% K rate over the last season from a 17% K rate going back to 2019. So those numbers not looking good. He's going against a Cleveland team that also doesn't have guys that strike out very much, only a 20% aggregate strikeout rate for these guys in the projected lineup today. 3 guys that strike out above league average, and the net result, Terry, is I don't see a lot of love for Keuchel or the Cleveland hitters. And I guess let's just talk about that side, and then we're going to have to talk more about Shane Bieber coming up next.
So I'm always willing to dive into the bargain bin for guys that I think are good pitchers in, even if it's a tricky spot when they're not getting owned at all and they project well for me. Dallas Keuchel is right on the borderline of that guy. Just given the fact that he never strikes guys out when I roster him, he's down to 11.3% in his 25 innings this year. You mentioned the decline down to about 15% over the last 2 years. So it's tough. You can not really rely on strikeouts. What I do like about him is his ability to get through a game, pitch a lot of innings, keep the ball in the yard, keep the ball on the ground. So he does have, despite a lack of strikeouts, a decent projection for me, and point per dollar at 6,200. There's a ton of upside there. So if you're using that salary the right way to get to high-end bats that nobody else is getting to in combinations, I don't mind getting to Dallas Keuchel for half the price of Shane Bieber on the other side. It's not a spot that I'm recommending everybody go to. It's more of a, for me, kind of a spot where I'm willing to take on a little bit of risk, hope that some of these aces get beat up a little bit, and hope that I get just enough out of Keuchel and then get to the big-time bats. But that's not really a comfy play for me to recommend that a lot of people do. So yeah, there's a reason he's 0.1% owned on FanDuel, and that's it. There's not a ton of strikeout upside, not a ton of strikeouts in this Cleveland lineup in general. Good lineup going up against him, could threaten him, a lot of power in that lineup. So a lot of reasons to not roster Dallas Keuchel here. For me, I'm willing to take on the little risk. Much more excited about the pitcher on the other side of this one for much more money though.
Yeah, Shane Bieber going to be another star pitcher today. I think you could grade him out. I'm looking at it a little more closely. I think the projection from Awesemo is favoring Bieber right now. I might be a little more inclined to go Cole's way, even though he does have the higher ownership. Bieber's stuff has been better, a 40.5% K rate over the last season and change, which has been up from a 34% K rate going back to 2019. The swing and strike rate numbers also taking a jump up. Chase rate also taking a jump up. So I think these are numbers that, looking at the 40% K rate, does seem relatively sustainable for a guy like Shane Bieber. He's going against the White Sox team, though. The weather, I think, makes me like Bieber more, but there are some dangerous hitters in this lineup. I think we all are going to know that about them for the most part. But, 6 guys that strike out above league average, I think it's still a pretty good spot. But again, for me, one where 3.1 implied run total, slightly better hitters would put me a little more on Garrett Cole, but really hard to argue. That's sort of me just making the case against Shane Bieber. But Terry, clearly a core play today, one you're going to get a lot of no matter what site you're playing on.
Yeah, the price is difficult. 12,000 on FanDuel, 10.7 a little bit more friendly on DK, but still the highest price pitcher over there as compared to 10.5 for Garrett Cole. On DK, I would definitely try and get to the $200 savings if it makes a difference for you. Cole on FanDuel, 200 more. Still like him better on FanDuel. Just looking at my overall projections, I actually have a handful of pitchers projected higher than Bieber, just given the matchup. There are excellent bats on the other side. He could have a standout start, no doubt about it. My median projection is in the 32 FanDuel point range, which puts him a few pegs down the board. Just to put it relatively, I've got Garrett Cole and Yu Darvish projecting both over 40, and Eovaldi projected right in that range as well. Same with McCullers. So he's a few options down the board in a tough matchup for me at that higher price. I actually don't know how much I will get to him on FanDuel when it's all said and done, particularly given that he's going to be 15.3% owned in our early projections. That might go up later in the day. It might come down. We'll see where it lands in the wash. But those different factors might edge some of the Shane Bieber shares out for me. Out of the top end pitchers, he's the one in the worst matchup. He's probably the best out of that group in terms of his strikeout upside in a vacuum, in terms of everything he's done over the last 2 years in a vacuum. I just worry a little bit about the spot. Not to say that I'm rostering a ton of White Sox stacks against him by any means, but it's a trickier spot than a lot of the other aces.
Yeah, I would agree there. And I'm with you as well. White Sox bats, to me, not something I'm looking at very much of at all. All right, we got 4 games left here. We are not going to get this done in the 4 minutes.
Minute per game. Let's go. We got it.
We can hit that like button, guys, and we're going to get out of here. 9:15 will be the latest. That much I can tell you. But let's go to the next game. Baltimore 3.5 implied runs against Mike Fiers. Mike Fiers, flyball Fiers, our pal, the baseball savant Jake Hari would often call him, a guy who has not shown anything of use at all. I guess the one thing that he has going for him is he somehow gives up less home runs than you would think for a guy who should be getting blasted based on what the numbers are. Going against Baltimore, though, in a park that does mostly help out pitchers, I don't want to play much of Mike Fiers. I don't think the Baltimore hitters are that fantastic. A 3% chance of being a top stack, along with 2% ownership, but you can play some Baltimore. It's not a great run total of 3.5 implied runs. So I feel like that's sort of the case actually for both sides, Terry. So maybe we could make up some time on this one. I don't like really much of this game at all. I guess John Means I have some sentimental value too, but I really don't want to go there either, going against Oakland's power hitters.
Yeah, I think there's enough on the Oakland side of things that I'm scared off of John Means. Not a guy I get to a ton anyway, and I think 9,000 on FanDuel is just way too high a price. He projects okay for me, but not a spot I'm looking. I would maybe throw some Orioles bats against Mike Fiers here. Not a pitcher I have much respect for. I think there's enough bats in that Orioles lineup between Austin Hayes, Trey Mancini, Michael Franco, DJ Stewart, if we want to throw him into the mix, and Ryan Mountcastle. Even without Santander in there, I can get to these guys a little bit when they're completely unowned. So I think that's a sneaky-ish spot on both sites. Hayes is drawing some ownership on DK because he only cost 29. So that's another guy you might want to pay attention to. Nobody even 1% owned on the FanDuel slate. So that's interesting as a sneaky spot, nothing more.
All right, next game up, we got Colorado, 4.1 implied runs going against Madison Bumgarner, another pitcher who's fallen off of a cliff since last season, down to a 19% carry at a 5.4 xFIP, getting barreled pretty hard, a 13% barreled ball rate for him. I do not want to play any Madison Bumgarner, even going against Colorado. This is not a spot that speaks to me too much for the pitching, but it is going to be another open roof day in Arizona, 93-degree weather is expected today there. So I don't mind going to Colorado hitters. You do have guys who rake against lefties for the most part, obviously going to be aided a bit by playing in Coors, but Trevor Story, CJ Cron, even Charlie Blackmon hits lefties pretty well. I think the Rocky stack, they do look overowned on DraftKings, so maybe it won't get a bunch, but I do think getting some Rockies to me seems like the most appealing part of this game overall.
Yeah, I don't know about most appealing overall. I think the bats on both sides are about similar, at least as they're grading out for me. So I could get to bats on both. I don't know that I would get to either one of these pitchers. Despite the fact that Mad Bum had a 7-inning no-hitter the last time out, which of course does not count as a no-hitter in my book, but apparently for some it does. So yeah, that was his big upside spot so far this year. I continue to think after having been on the Mad Bum is still Mad Bum. He'll come back one day, bandwagon for a very long time. I've been kind of off of that this year. Maybe he's going to prove me wrong again the other way. But for right now, yeah, I'm not getting any Mad Bum. Not really getting much John Gray on the other side of this one. The price is up. 8,800 is too much for him on FanDuel. 81, if you wanted to put him in the mix, if you've got the money on DK. There's not a ton to love about the Diamondbacks lineup, so I guess I could argue it, but not really a spot. There's enough pitching options on the board. I think you're probably right that the Rockies going up against Bumgarner with those right-handed bats would probably be the best spot. CJ Cron definitely pops for some power here. Trevor Story, same thing. Both very nice marks in my home run model. So those would be my two favorite bats overall.
And keep in mind, if you do play Colorado, this is not a team where, again, there's a couple guys driving the ownership. Trevor Story in particular going to be 20% owned on DK. And TJ Crone also going to be 12% owned. So keep that in mind, I guess, in terms of your overall ownership product. But I think there's a little more appeal here going against Bumgarner. And they do look overowned. So keep that in mind, as is always going to be the case for MLB. It's the most crucial part is the leverage, the ownership, all that stuff. Next game up, San Francisco 3.1 implied runs going against Yu Darvish. San Diego 4.5 implied runs going against Logan Webb. And I guess let's talk about Yu Darvish here because you mentioned he's one of your top options on FanDuel. I think he is a tier behind both Garrett Cole and Shane Bieber on DraftKings, but still would have no issue getting him. 31% K rate. Not facing a Giants lineup that strikes out a lot. Only 4 guys that strike out above league average and a 21% aggregate K rate for these guys. And at the top of the order, like Tommy La Stella just doesn't strike out at all. 7.8% K rate against righties. So maybe it does draw out Darvish's day a little bit more. But Darvish, to me, 20% owned on DraftKings. I feel comfortable with that number, Terry. I don't know about Giants hitters at all. That doesn't stand out to me. But I think Darvish, talk to me about him on FanDuel because you did say he's more of a priority play for you there.
Yeah, he's one of my highest projected pitchers on the slate. 11,000, you're getting him at a nice discount from Cole and from Bieber in the 12s. So as my second highest projected pitcher, I like that a lot. I expect I'm going to have a good amount of it. Part of what's driving it is so far this year, you're totally right about San Francisco not striking out much. I want to put that on the board. But so far this year against right-handed pitching, they're second worst in the league with a 27.9% strikeout rate. Creating runs 12% worse than average, 161 team ISO against righties. So they've struggled out of the gate this year. If you extend that back to the start of the 2019 season, that becomes one of the best strikeout marks in the league, 22.3% strikeout rate. So they're a talented team. They avoid strikeouts typically against righties, but they struggle with it a little bit so far this year. I'm hoping that trend continues. Darvish, one of the more spectacular strikeout options in the league. Since he added that cutter a couple years ago, it's made all the difference. He's been above 30% strikeout since then. I believe in you, Darvish. I believe in the spot. I like the discount on FanDuel. The $9,500 price on DK is absurd. He would be my SP1 with a bullet over there.
All right, let's talk about the Padres lineup here going against Logan Webb. I'm kind of surprised they don't have higher odds of being a top stack today. Only a 3% chance of being the top stack, according to our top stacks tool at Awesemo.com. 2.2% ownership. I would favor them a little bit more than that. Logan Webb has avoided power hitting for the most part, a 2% on run rate over the last season, 2.3% rate going back to 2019. But he is still not really getting strikeouts. He's given up a 287 batting average. I think there are some bad signs for Logan Webb that a quality hitting team like the Padres could take advantage of. So I'm more in on the Padres stack, and I don't see any Logan Webb in my future at all.
I do not see any Logan Webb in my future. I'm not sure how much I'm going to get to the Padres, though. They're also kind of avoiding power. 130 team ISO against right-handed pitching this year is fourth worst in the league. 21.8% strikeout rate is the second best in the league, I believe, or third or fourth best in the league. I haven't sorted it by that column. 97 WRC plus is fine as a team, just not hitting a ton of home runs or hitting for a ton of power against righties yet this year. But I do think it's there for sure. Going back historically, 209 home runs over the last 3 years, 102 WRC plus as a team, 184 team ISO. So the upside is there. I think maybe people are catching up in the public, though, that maybe, yeah, they get a lot of buzz as one of the better baseball teams in the league. But maybe for DFS purposes, these guys aren't the standout lineup that everybody thought they were coming in, right? Fernando Tatis, spectacular option every single day. Manny Machado, very, very good option every single day. A lot of these other hitters, Trent Grisham, Eric Hosmer, Will Myers, Jake Cronenworth, even Jurickson Profar, nice hitters. Some skill set for sure. You know, Profar's a good speed guy and got a little bit of power, one of those 15-15 types. But overall, they're not everyday superstar standout type players, which I think has an impact on what we're doing DFS wise, particularly when they're priced up the way they are as being one of the better baseball teams in the league. So it's kind of interesting. And I think that might be what's affecting the ownership here. That said, in this spot with nobody going to them, I think I can get there because they're not going to be owned. So it's a weird little spot, weird pricing. Definitely an interesting one to keep an eye on today.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, the more you're talking about it too, like maybe it's a spot to just take some one-offs or even, mini stacks. I think maybe as a max. I don't know if the full 5-man gets there, but I like Cronenworth a little bit more than it may seem. A 228 ISO for him versus righties. I think he's shown some signs of life in this lineup that has needed some, especially when Tatis was out for that little bit. So yeah, I don't mind the Padres stack. 5-mans do look a little bit less appealing now that we're talking through it, but 3-mans and one-offs seem like more in order here going against Logan Webb. Last game on the slate, we did it. The Angels 4.3 imply runs against Chris Flexen, who has not been flexing on him with a 290 batting average allowed, but he has given up a 3.6 xFIP. That seems to show that there could be better things to come. Only a 1% on run rate allowed. Been getting unlucky too with his BABIP, a 360 BABIP for him. So that should drop a little bit, one would think. Going against the Angels, though, maybe not the spot. I don't see enough from Flexen to think that he's worth even taking a dart throw on. Maybe pops up on an optimizer here because the projection from Awesemo doesn't look that bad, but Angels hitters, I think, would be more the thing here. I really, obviously, you're going to the normal guys here. Trout, Rendon, Walsh, those are the big three. Otani as well, I think, in play. Terry, how are you feeling here? Would you get any Flexen, or are you feeling more the Angels stack?
Yeah, I don't think I need to get to Chris Flexen. The price is fine. 7,300 Fanduel, 7,100 DK. If you wanted to throw a couple darts on DK as your SP2, I wouldn't necessarily hate it, but I just don't think this is the spot. I don't think he misses the KBO. He was spectacular. 28% strikeout rate in the KBO last year with like a 274 xFIP. I think he won the KBO version of the Cy Young, came back to the majors and promptly became Chris Flexen again. So I think it's much more about the Angels side of things. I like including David Fletcher in my Angels stacks from the top for no money. Very good hit tool, gets on base ahead of the big bats. And nobody's going to him under 1% ownership on FanDuel. Otani on FanDuel under 2% ownership. Trout, always gets owned, but is not blasting through the 40% mark like he has been the last few days. Rendon and Walsh, even Upton and Pujols I can include there. So definitely more about the Angels stack for me on that side of things.
Yeah, bad bullpen behind Flexen too, going up a 5.3 xFIP. So I think a lot of reasons to go to the Angels today. As a team that's for not being owned for once here, even though the park, certainly a downgrade from their usual home park. Andrew Heaney on the other side, I think another guy who I wouldn't mind playing he's actually very cheap on DraftKings in a way that is surprising to me. He's going to be 40% owned. So that is the crappy part here. If you are playing him alongside a Shane Bieber or Garrett Cole or even a Yu Darvish, that lineup is going to be owned amongst the pitching. So get more contrarian with your stacks. But Heaney, to me, the top value pitcher on the slate by a wide margin, a 28% K rate for him going against a Seattle lineup with 6 guys that strike out above league average and a 27% aggregate K rate for their projected lineup. Heaney might be the best pitching play on the slate. Obviously, not the highest upside of guys like Cole, but relative to salary, he should not be this cheap in this situation.
No, that is a dramatic misprice by DraftKings. That feels like they called FanDuel up and asked him what he should cost today, because that is just way off. So yeah, I can get to Heaney all day long on DK for that price. 87 on FanDuel, I'll have some, but it's a very, very different play. I think he's got excellent strikeout upside, 36.7% strikeout rate in his 20 innings this year, 25.1 last year, 28.9 in 95 innings the year before that. When he's on the mound, he is a high-end upside strikeout guy. Mariners this year so far, 29.3% strikeout rate against lefties is 4th worst in the league. Detroit against lefties, 36% strikeout rate this year. Ouch. God, that's bad. So yeah, there's a ton of strikeouts sitting here for him. There's a couple righty bats for him to dance around with a little bit of pop. I'm thinking of Mitch Haniger here. I'm thinking of Kyle Lewis here. But overall, I think this is a matchup against a pretty weak team that strikes out too much. I think we can throw Andrew Heaney at these Mariners all day long.
Yeah, and at Seattle, too, if you are trying to get some leverage against Heaney, which I don't think is crazy, some of the guys that Terry just mentioned, I would also throw in Tom Murphy at catcher, being a guy who has pretty good pop against lefties, a 326 ISO. But still, they are going to be overowned, it looks like, according to the top stacks tool for a little bit, though. Their chance to be a top value stack, 8%. I think if you're not going to play Heaney, getting some Mariners in your lineup doesn't seem like the craziest thing. But Heaney on his face, taking a median projection and the matchup, to me, the best value play here, and I think hard to dispute on the slate. And Terry, we did it. We got through 14 games, 8 minutes over the time that we wanted to hit. Any final thoughts for you, or plugs, or whatever you want to say here before we turn the mics off?
You sure you don't want to go around again? I can just run this directly into live before lock and stay on. I mean,
There's 3 more hours covering every game at more depth, but make sure to follow at DigitalB21. That is Terry's handle to go check out. Follow at Chris Spags. Follow at Awesemo_com. Make sure to go play on Yahoo today as well. Tune into the tip-off, the deeper dive, and live before lock, because we're going to be talking more Yahoo today, but play over there. Play some NBA. The 25K Big Baller is going to be a lot of fun for players out there, and they're giving you guys $30 free if you use the promo code Awesemo in contest entry. So go to Yahoo, sign up on there if you haven't. Use the promo code Awesemo to get in there, and hit that like button and subscribe, because we have content going on all the time for 14-game slates, for 4-game slates, for 1-game slates. We have everything you want out there, so make sure to subscribe to the channel as well. We appreciate you guys for watching. Hope you have a great day, and see you soon. Good luck. Woo, Jesus.